Resident Evil 2 was developed by Capcom and launched on the Sony PlayStation on January 21st, 1998. As a successor to the game which defined survival horror, it had big shoes to fill. Fortunately for Capcom, it took these shoes, slipped them on like Cinderella's slipper, and smashed us all over the head with it. The game was a phenomenal, selling above the original outing which released 2 years prior, netting total sales over its entire run 6 million copies. Metacritic scores Resident Evil 2 at an 89%, which is lower than its predecessor, but the impact it had on the series and the wider gaming landscape is irrefutable. It solidified Resident Evil as a power franchise for the PlayStation. It forced companies to scramble and come up with their own takes on the survival horror genre, and it caused Kleenex shares to reach record heights. Okay, I might have made that last one up, but you get the point here. Resident Evil 2 is a game with legendary status, but for me, I've never regarded it in that same light. Now just to give you some background here, I was 9 on the game's release. My uncle at the time knew some guy that chipped PlayStations and could get me a copy of the game for £5. Now £5 back then for a 9-year-old was a fortune. So I washed the dishes, I chucked the hoover around, I washed the car, and earned enough pocket money to get the game. What I didn't know at the time was RE2 came on 2 discs. My uncle gave me 1. Now I don't know if it's my memory failing me in my old age, or if this is true to rights, but I vividly remember the lab section as Claire, and the start of the game as Leon, but that's it. Now I've chalked that up to my uncle creating some ungodly hybrid that never should have been allowed in the hands of a gullible wide-eyed kid. As such, I played it through, thought something was up, but never bought it to see what I was actually missing. With this in mind, my only real experience with Resident Evil 2 is the 2019 remake, which I reviewed on the channel a while ago. So it's fair to say I was bursting with excitement to get into this game and essentially experience it for the first time. Now over the course of this review, I'll explain what works, what doesn't, and ultimately answer the question, does RE2 hold up in 2022? As with all my reviews, I'll be splitting this into plot, gameplay, and presentation. And for those that haven't got to this before, there will be spoilers throughout. Now let's dive in. Resident Evil 2 takes what the first game set up and expands on the world tenfold. Not only do we learn that Umbrella has their hands in all aspects of Raccoon City, from bribing the police chief right through to running a secret lab underneath the city itself, we also get clarification on just how evil Umbrella truly are. Playing the first game, it's Wesker that's ultimately the bad guy. You know there's been an accident which caused the outbreak and the deaths of everyone working there, but your mind goes to the betrayal and the setup of STARS, not the company conducting these experiments. Here, it's Umbrella, front and center. They send a squad to retrieve Birkin's life's work, and gun him down to claim the precious G-virus for themselves. This unintentionally causes an outbreak of the T-virus, leading to a citywide disaster. And then, to top it all off, while the city goes to hell, they dispatch a tyrant into the field to try and cover their arses. Proper scumbag behaviour. Now our story begins 2 months after the events of the Spencer Mansion. Leon S. Kennedy is on his way to start a brand new job in the Raccoon City Police, while Claire Redfield is searching for the whereabouts of her brother, Chris. Now after Claire stops for a quick bite to eat, she learns firsthand that she's on the menu. God damn it, I couldn't resist that one. Leon steps in with the rescue, and the two head for the safety of the RPD. Now I covered the plot in my Resident Evil 2 remake video, so to save your time, I won't cover old ground. If you want to view that, you can find it here. But for the sake of this game, there's still a few points I want to cover which separate it from its predecessor and its remake that I think are relevant for you. At this point, it's important I clarify something. I played this game through under the order Claire A, Leon B. The reason for this is the fanbase argues this is the true version of events that happened, as elements from this story are confirmed to take place in later entries. For example, in Resident Evil 6, Sherry confirms she can heal quickly due to her being previously infected with the G virus, something that only happens in Clear A. Darkside Chronicles, in its retelling of RE2, also seems to favour this route, especially when it comes to the supposed death of Ada. Ultimately, does it really matter? No. There's elements from both A and B scenarios which occur across the wider series, but I wanted to go with the majority opinion for the sake of this review. Now what's cool is that unlike Resident Evil 2 Remake, here in the original, to see everything you'll need to play through the game 4 times, with quite substantial changes occurring in each variant that give you a real reward for seeing it through. It's awesome to see the team put this much work into giving the player more bang for their buck, and I suppose that's the feeling I have when it comes to this plot. Everything is taken to the next level. The size and scope compared to the first entry are night and day. Instead of a mansion complex, you have an entire city. The files, which help shape the world providing much needed context across the entire game, have been increased from 15 in Resident Evil 1 to 22 in RE2, and the vast majority of these pickups are incredibly detailed. And when it comes to cutscenes, we get nearly 4 times the amount. Resident Evil 2 does what any good sequel should. It grows the world and ups the stakes, without losing the central themes that make the original so impactful. RE2 takes what came before, with the fixed camera angles, tank controls and limited inventory space, which made the original so terrifying, and adds to this with a host of improvements. First up, the map. They added color coding to the doors. I love planning a route across the environment as much as the next guy, but when you're unsure of where you need to go, and can't quite remember which door is open by which key, it can get annoying, especially if you take a break from the game for a couple of days. Color coding the doors so you know at a glance which routes are now available to you upon finding a new key is godlike. It's so helpful and doesn't take anything away from the challenge that's presented to you. You still need to plan. You still need to weigh up what you'll need to overcome the challenges around every corner, but now you get to your destination and know for certain you have the right key to open it. The second quality of life change is in the item box. In RE1, if you have stacks of ammo stored in the box, you'll have to add them into your inventory, exit the box, open your inventory, and then combine them. Here, in RE2, you just add them to your inventory, and they'll auto-stack. These may seem like small things not worth praising, but by God, I had such a massive smile on my face when I encountered these for the first time. To me, it just shows the team thought about the user experience and how best to streamline things, and I really appreciated that. Now the next improvement is a big one, the zapping system. So what is zapping, I hear you ask? Well, the zapping system is where a choice you make in your first run impacts your second. There's 9 examples of this across the game, and all of them have substantial impacts on how your B scenario plays out. Now here's just a few examples. After opening the weapons locker in the underground of the RPD, you find a side pack, which gives your character extra inventory slots and a submachine gun. You can choose to take one, both, or none. The second run will then reflect this, meaning you can make your first scenario super easy by taking both, but you'll be handicapping your next run. At the midpoint, you'll do battle with an alligator. By killing it in A, it won't appear in B, but if you choose not to finish the job, it will be there waiting for you on the next run. In the lab, you can choose to use BOW gas, which will make the enemies much easier to deal with for that scenario. But if you do this, when you return here in the B scenario, the IVs will become poisonous, as they've adapted to that gas. So the choice becomes, do you hold off using it on your first character, so that on your second run, you can activate the gas without any consequence at all? This system creates choice. Now if you've seen any of my previous reviews, you would know that choice, for the player, and the consequence from said choice, is why I adore Resident Evil. It's built into the fabric of every single encounter in the classic series, and zapping just adds to that to create additional ramifications, which make the game interesting to play multiple times through. But not only that, it ties the two stories in your A and B character together in a way that wasn't there in both RE1 and in the RE2 remake. It makes it seem like both stories are happening concurrently. The one character really did arrive at the RPD earlier than the other, and this is helped by the routes that you take. In RE1, the route for both Jill and Chris is the same, with the only differences being who has a lockpick and who has a lighter, while RE2 includes the same character differences, but creates completely different routes for Leon and Claire. Claire has to unlock Captain Iron's office and find the items across the RPD to make this happen, whereas Leon doesn't have to worry about that. Instead, he needs to find chess pieces which will unlock a door in the sewer. Add on to this the specific NPCs you meet in your run, tied to whichever character you're playing as, with Leon meeting Ada and Claire meeting Sherry, and you've got wildly different plots, with their own boss encounters specific to that run. Now, when RE2 Remake was released, I couldn't understand how diehard fans of Resident Evil 2 could be disappointed, but after playing this, I get it. I know now why they felt like the second run was lackluster, because here in the original, the second run is just as impactful as your first, bringing the entire experience together into a complete product. Now, I could go on and on about the zapping system, but I think I've spent long enough on that, so let's move on. RE2 introduced weapon modification to the series. Now, while playing as Leon, you can find parts for the handgun, shotgun, and magnum. All three of these parts turn your normal guns into death machines. Just look at this. It looks like he's about to rip his arm off. And the sound. Holy shit! It's a great inclusion, which rewards you for exploring your environment and adds another difference between your playthroughs as Claire and Leon. So far, I've been nothing but positive on Resident Evil 2, but this is where that's gonna change. Take it in. This, right here, is public enemy number 1. Now, if I was a 12-year-old girl surrounded by zombies, lickers, and my mutated father who wanted to impregnate me, I'd have ended it all frame 1. But Sherry finds the courage to not only go with Claire, she decides to go solo, dodging the undead without any weapons. She's a badass. Until you have to chaperone her, and then she becomes nothing more than a pain in my arse. Move more than 5 feet away from her, she stops and sits down. You're not even out of eye line with her. She just thinks, nah, I'll chill here in this infested sewer. If I could have left her, I would have. After all, she ain't my kid. I'm sure Annette will find her eventually. The only other complaint, and it's not one I thought I'd be saying going into this, but here it goes. Resident Evil 2 is too easy. In Resident Evil games, I always seem to get to the end boss with more ammo than I can take into the fight, and that's something that I'm acutely aware of. It's a me problem. I can't help myself. I'll find I scrape by with as little as possible just in case I need it, never realizing how much I have at my disposal. However, with RE2, it became abundantly clear just how much I had, especially during Leon's campaign. I'd reached the lab with 60 magnum rounds, 40 shotgun shells, 90 odd pistol rounds, a full flamethrower, and a machine gun. Add on to this the abundance of heals that I'd accumulated across my journey, it meant I never had a single worry. It turned the lab into a run and gun, where I challenged myself to try and use some of this ammo up. I was walking around like Tony Montana. Say hello to my little friend! To be totally honest here, the problem with the difficulty in this entry is it feels uneven. In the beginning of the game, I was watching every bullet like a hawk. There's way more enemies than in RE1, and they appear in large groups, forcing you to take out a few of them to move around unimpeded. So when you're reliant solely on the pistol with limited heals, this is challenging. But as soon as you get your mitts on a grenade launcher or a shotgun, you can destroy these groups with 1 or 2 shots. And as you regularly find ammo for these bigger weapons all over the place, You never get the sense that you need to play conservatively. Now, it's important to note I played the 1998 original release on the normal difficulty, which is the hardest available on this version. I know that in later ports for the Dreamcast they included a hard mode, and that would probably solve this issue for me. But as far as my experience playing the PS1 original, it's valid criticism. Launching in 1998, 2 years after Resident Evil 1, Capcom had the PlayStation figured out, and it really shows. Resident Evil 2 is a massive improvement from its predecessor. The game uses the same pre-rendered backgrounds, but they are far more detailed. From the streets of Raccoon City to the lab underneath the city itself, every environment tells a story, and it's incredibly varied, with each background being a joy to look at. It's no wonder the settings in this game have been called back time and time again in subsequent releases. They are truly iconic. And it's not just the backgrounds which have seen improvements, it's all aspects of the game. Character models are significantly improved, both for our hero characters and the enemies. Take zombies for example. Now they aren't just lab coats or naked. Here they can be male and female civilians, police officers, lab workers, or test subjects, with different variations on these designs to make groups stand out. How you damage these zombies has also changed. Here, unloading a shotgun at point blank range will split them in half, causing them to crawl after you, and if they grab hold of you and you mash out, you can rip their arm off. Little details make all the difference, and here in RE2, they went above and beyond to add these in. Take for example the player health. In RE1, you have no way of knowing how close to death you are without going into the inventory and checking your status. In RE2, they added animations to make it easily identifiable to the player. You slow down, hunch over, and shuffle, and the more damage you get, the slower you get. It became standard for the series from this point, and it's easy to see why. It's an immersive detail that must drive speedrunners wild. But for the rest of us, it's essential. These graphical improvements help immerse the player in the world, but the biggest contributor to the atmosphere across the game is the music and sound. Every enemy is easily identifiable thanks to their own unique sound palette, helping you identify the threat you're about to encounter, from the spider's soft taps to the groan of a zombie. Now you combine all this with a soundtrack which arguably could be the best in the series, with the save theme, RPG main hall, and an end credits theme, which goes so unbelievably hard, I couldn't stop myself from dancing like a madman. On the opposite end of the emotional spectrum, I found RE2 engrossed me so deeply that I jumped at every possible scare, even when I knew something was coming. So when my wife unexpectedly came into the room to drop me off a drink, oh Jesus Christ! Now that's when you know the atmosphere has truly got you. Usually at this point is where I'd slaughter the voice acting, but to my surprise, Resident Evil 2's voice acting is great. The only person that does a dodgy job is the trucker at the beginning.
That guy's a maniac! Why'd he bite me?
Apart from him, I can't fault anyone. So instead of hitting anyone down, I want to build somebody up. I want to give a special shout out to Alison Court. It's always a pleasure to hear her as the voice of Claire Redfield, and hopefully, one day, we'll have her back to reprise her role. Now let's end this review with the boss and enemy designs. All the usuals appear here, zombies, dogs and spiders, but they are joined with new additions, moths, ivies and lickers. Now the only one I want to mention here is the lickers. Holy hell, they are terrifying. Sneaking by them, looking like you've just shit your pants, is a physical representation of my anxiety squaring up to them in the early game. They hit with such ferocity, you need to respect them. Designing them to be blind and hunt solely off sound was a genius decision. It creates a different type of fear from the hunters in Resident Evil 1. They aren't just formidable foes, they can be evaded, so naturally you attempt it, slowly shuffling, before breaking into a mad dash for the nearest door. The tension you feel is simply incredible. Now bosses in this entry are great. It's nice to see Resident Evil 2 set up recurring enemies that stay throughout the entire story, as it gives you plenty of time to see the effects of the G-Virus as Berkey mutates across the game. Now, it's not quite as varied as Resident Evil 1 due to this, but the locations where you engage in these battles changes every time, and that's what makes these fights feel unique. They are always a spectacle, even if the end result is pulling out the Magnum and ending it in a handful of bullets. Now, I have a couple of critiques. Mr. X. His end fight as Super Tyrant is fine, but during the story, he's super easy to deal with. He appears multiple times throughout the B campaign, but he's never a threat. You purposely take a hit from him, and then run through a door. Sure, he scared the pants off me when he did his Kool-Aid Man impression, but when it came to getting around him, he wasn't all that. You can see why they wanted to improve on this when it came to Nemesis's design the year after. Mr. X is a great idea, but not executed properly. The alligator fight. That was literally it. A huge spectacle where I was geared up for a massive fight, and then it just ended. Resident Evil 2 takes what RE1 set up and took the formula to the next level. It improves upon the original in nearly every way. It's cinematic, tells a compelling story which actually makes sense across its two playable characters. It grows the universe of Resident Evil, adding new enemies, a new virus, and showing us just how evil Umbrella are, and gives us, the player, more choice than we ever had previously with the zapping system, which opens the game up to 4 playthroughs to see everything it has to offer. This game is a masterpiece. Any of my critiques across this entire review are so negligible compared to everything it does right. If you're like me, and either haven't played it before, or haven't for a long time, I'd encourage you to put 8 hours aside and play through the game with both Leon and Claire. You won't regret it. And that's it for this review. If you enjoyed the video, put a like on it, and consider subscribing to the channel for more Resident Evil content. I try to respond to everyone, so put your thoughts on the game in the comments below, and we can discuss it. Up next on the channel is my definitive tier list on the entire Resident Evil series, which will bring this series to a close. But what's next? Well, that's up to you. You can find a poll in the description, and it'll be the pinned comment. Whatever wins will be the next series I tackle. And if you still want a bit more from me, then check out my podcast, In PS We Trust. It's a PlayStation podcast with me and my co-host crack a few beers and discuss the latest news, rumours and hype for all things PlayStation. I'll have links in the description. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.